Andy and I are going to talk to you about the ideas in our book and also ideas that we've been working with in our interdisciplinary global research network that we call the Maintainers. And we've been doing this for about 6 years now. Here's our contact info for those of you who are interested. And usually when we talk about the ideas in the book and the Maintainers, we like to tell a story about where, how this all started, I guess, about 6 years ago. And that is, it literally started as a joke. So Andy and I had grown tired of kind of hype around innovation, speak, as we call it, in higher education. We both work in universities. And we had been kind of playing with ways of critiquing that for a while. And then we saw a new opportunity when this book came out, Walter Isaacson's book, The Innovators, How a Group of Hackers, Geniuses, and Geeks Created the Digital Revolution. We thought there were a number of things wrong with this book, but most centrally that it kind of focused on the shiny and the new. And it was missing all of these aspects of technology, which is often old and creaking and requires care, that we thought was really important. So Andy proposed in an email to me and a friend that we should create a counter volume called The Maintainers, How Bureaucrats, Standards Engineers, and Introverts Created Technologies That Kind of Work Most of the Time. And that was just something fun. I started playing with it on Twitter and on blog posts, but then it kind of just took off. It went kind of like lightly viral and took on a life of its own. So then two things happened as a follow-up. We held our first Maintainers Conference in 2016. And the same day the conference started, our essay, Hail the Maintainers, came out. And the conference was basically a bunch of history nerds and other kinds of social science nerds talking about technology and maintenance. But even though that was true, it kind of even went more viral and took on a whole new life. And it got picked up by The Atlantic and Le Monde and Guardian, and some Dutch publications wrote about it. We got invited to do an op-ed for the New York Times, and there was an episode of Freakonomics Radio, and then eventually it led to this book. And part of the reason I like to tell the story of the joke is that on the first part, we didn't really plan to get into this life. We're kind of like living out just kind of something we fell into, though it's become a totally fascinating area of inquiry for us. But also, I think that, you know, the joke does work for other people, that when they hear about Andy's joke and the ideas in this book, it kind of resonates with them and their lives and the lives of their loved ones in many ways. And so that's what we like to explore. And so today we're going to kind of go through three sections. I'm going to talk about the puzzle of innovation speak, and I'll tell you more about what innovation speak means in a minute. And then Andy's going to handle the next two sections on how the innovation delusion suffocates maintenance and maintainers, and adopting what we call the maintenance mindset. So first of all, when we talk about the rise of innovation speak, we really like to make a distinction between what we call actual innovation or real innovation versus innovation speak. So actual innovation is the process of introducing new things or business practices or energy resources. It can be a lot of different things. You know, the kind of thinker for us on these issues is the economist Joseph Schumpeter. So innovation can take many forms: new products, services, new methods of production. He had his 5 ways that innovation can play out. Innovation is greater than, but also different than inventions. So inventions are ideas that can just sit on a shelf. Innovation is the process of actually diffusing ideas out into society. And innovation is a driver of change. Famously, Schumpeter talked about the gale of creative destruction, that change and innovation can actually undermine existing industries and ways of doing things. Now we contrast this with innovation speak, which is a kind of sales pitch of buzzwords, and Andy likes the word gibberish, which I think is right, that has developed in the last 50 years. So innovation, the process of introducing new technologies is old. You know, we can talk about the Industrial Revolution and things like that, but innovation speak is really less than 50 years old, or about 50 years old, and really big innovation speak is even newer. Often innovation speak is cast in a language of fear. So it's fear of being disrupted. It's fear of international competition, that the United States is going to be left behind by China, or the Dutch are going to be left behind by whoever, or that, our children are not going to be able to find jobs unless we put them in coding camp or whatever. If we want a thinker who's associated with innovation speak, we can think of the late business school thinker Clayton Christensen, who came up with the notion of disruptive innovation. And disruptive innovation was just creative destruction, Schumpeter's idea. It was a new process or business model or technology that would upend established ways of doing things. If you were worried about this, you could hire Christensen's consultancy, which was known as InnoSight. And InnoSight could put innovation goggles on you, and you could, he would show you where innovation lay or show you how you were going to be disrupted. Now, the problem is that when social scientists went back and re-examined Christensen's data, only about 9% of the cases he said were cases of disruptive innovation actually fit his own definition. So while these ideas were really hot for a long time in the business world, they aren't actually true. So, when we tell the story of how innovation speak has become so dominant in societies around the world, I would say it's not just the US, it's not just Europe. You see it in China, you see it in India and Australia and so many other places of the world, in Africa. We really have to tell a story of a radical transformation in how a word was judged. So in the church-dominated Middle Ages, innovation was heresy, that it was introducing new religious ideas that could get you burned alive or otherwise killed. So in 1548, the King of England issued a proclamation against those that do with innovate. So then, if it used to be a value that was despised and could get you killed, the question is, well, how did it get so radically reappraised in value? And I think that, for us, the story is really about the Industrial Revolution, how new technologies like the railroad and telephones, telegraphs, eventually automobiles, aviation, all these things diffuse into society and really change quality of life. This is a very famous American painting that shows Manifest Destiny. And as you can see on the right-hand side of the painting, there's a bunch of new technologies, including trains, telegraph, and in the distance, the Brooklyn Bridge. And you can see that these people are basically chasing Native Americans into darkness because they don't have the technology. By the mid-19th century, authors like Samuel Smiles were writing books celebrating the lives of engineers and inventors as really changing the quality of life. And, by the late 19th and early 20th century, you have kind of cults of invention around people like Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, and the like. Yet the rise in the use of the word innovation itself is a post-World War II phenomenon. It doesn't happen until after World War II. This is a Google Ngram. It's a freely available tool on the internet that you can use to look at word usage over time. It uses Google Books to look at this. And what it's showing you is that the use of the word innovation arises basically after World War II, with the steepest periods in the 60s and 90s. Now, this is an older engram that only goes to 2008. You can now run engrams to like 2018 or 2019, right up to the present. And if you look at it, use of the word innovation just keeps going up and up and up. And the question is, why did this happen? And there's lots of reasons to look at this, but one of them is that economists basically hypothesized in the late 50s and early 60s that technological change, or technological innovation as it came to be known as, was creating economic growth. And so they're like, well, how do we get more of this, basically? And so the term technological innovation took off at about that time. Then something that kind of reinforced this move was that in the late 70s, books about in the late 70s, the term innovation policy takes off in the US and in Europe. And there, it's really the government's goal to create technological change in new industries. That's how you're going to create growth. So it really becomes a focus of government. And at about the same time that innovation policy is taking off, you start to see the first books about Silicon Valley being written. And those books are really self-help books for regional planners, mayors, and other city, type people, state level people too, to copy Silicon Valley and try to create Silicon Valley all over the world eventually, in India and China. And even when I gave a talk in Australia, the opposition party was talking about Kangaroo Valley. So this became a model that everyone's supposed to copy all over the world. And we can go on, but basically since the 1990s, there's been this kind of self-reinforcing circle of discourse and speak, often focused on Silicon Valley, that has a whole kind of jargon around it of what we call innovation speak. So we can talk about disruption. It used to be big data. Now it's AI, agile, lean. I mean, there's just a whole soup of terms, thought leaders. We could go on. Now, Andy's really going to get in a second about the big costs of this kind of over-focus on innovation, but I just want to focus on 2 points. First of all, innovation speak is not necessarily getting us more innovation, okay? So we know, here's the top 10 rules of entrepreneurship from Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn. And if you look at his top 10 rules, rule number 1 is look for disruptive change. Well, there's no evidence that actually more disruption has been happening in the last couple decades, nor is there any evidence that you can strategically look for disruption and that leads to more disruption. So there's just bad thinking in a lot of these places. The bigger question, though, and here we're drawing on the work of people like Robert Gordon and other economists, there's a really convincing argument to my mind that innovation has been either plateaued since about 1970 or actually slowed down. And we don't see a lot of innovation in many spaces. When we talk about innovation today, it's always about, our cell phones, basically, and the internet. But lots of areas of human life are not experiencing innovation, and yet we're hearing more and more innovation speak. So there's a difference between actual innovation and innovation speak, and innovation speak is not necessarily getting us more innovation. A couple other thoughts is that, I think if you look at reporting on Silicon Valley, this is not a place we should emulate, this craze of treating Silicon Valley like the thing we all need to be doing. It's a very unequal place. There's a housing crisis there. Homelessness is a real problem, and it's very hard to live there. There's lots of problems in Silicon Valley, including racism and sexism. You can go on. It's not a place to emulate necessarily. And, the final thought before I hand it over to Andy is that we've come to treat innovation as an end in itself, as a value in itself. Like it just means goodness or something. But we know that's not true. And the reason we know this is not true is because according to very strict economic definitions of innovation, including Schumpeter's, this is crack cocaine. It is, according to Schumpeterian models of innovation, clearly a major innovation in the 80s and 90s. It disrupted other products like powder cocaine, blow. Lots of people wanted it. They would do almost anything they could to get their hands on it. There's a lot of risky entrepreneurship around it called drug dealing. It is innovation in strict definitions. innovator. This is a problem in our culture, that we've come to treat innovation as an end in itself. And just so that we're not making crack cocaine jokes, or we can also say that, it's not just about crack. Fortune magazine named Enron one of the most innovative companies in America in 6 years in a row. And then it came out that it was all, a giant fraud. This isn't, there's also innovation that's not good for society, actually. Now, Andy's, I'm going to hand it off to him. He's going to talk more about how innovation speak comes to talk and act as a kind of distraction. And go ahead, Andy, you can take over. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Lee. Whoops, let me just get this going. Good. Okay, so the place to pick up is the core premise of our book, which is the innovation delusion is a mistaken notion that innovation cures all of our problems. As Lee's demonstrated, this isn't necessarily the case, and it certainly turns out to cause tremendous amounts of damage when applied universally. So what I'm going to talk about is some aspects of the book where we go into examples where this innovation delusion suffocates maintenance and maintainers. Now, before I go too further, I should tell everyone what our working definition of maintenance is. It's the preservation of existing order. It's a very simple definition. Lee, I think, likes to talk about it, and I agree, as the fight against entropy, as a never-ending battle against entropy. So there's aligned concepts and practices such as repair, which is the restoration of working order. If you do maintenance well, you don't need to do repair. There's also care. Care and maintenance are often two sides of the same coin. It's difficult to maintain something meaningfully without caring for it. And the application is usually in some kind of infrastructure, some kind of system. So in the book, we talk about maintenance at three scales. At the level of infrastructure, embodied here by the painter, the famous picture at the Eiffel Tower. At the level of organizations, or the meso level, here are the images of a maintenance technician. And of course, at the individual level, pictured here with medical workers, obviously during COVID-19. One of the big problems is short-term thinking. That's one of the big problems that suffocates maintainers. Now, short-term thinking is something that we all do. People argue that it has evolutionary roots, that it's a basic ingredient for our survival. There's also significant incentives for individuals and organizations and societies to take care of short-term needs as opposed to thinking about what happens 20 or 50 years down the line. So we could go through that exercise on three scales if we're talking about our own diets or decisions that we make in our organizations about deferred maintenance, or society certainly going into debt or not paying attention to potentially catastrophic issues like climate change. So this, on all three of those scales, is a real recipe for disaster. Let me give you some examples. The first comes from American infrastructure, where you might be familiar with the American Society for Civil Engineers infrastructure report card that they do annually. In 2017, and usually America's infrastructure gets a D+. Those of you in higher education will know that D+ is just a polite way of saying you failed. And this is true across all elements of American infrastructure, averaged between education, transportation, electric power and light, bridges, as you see in the image, and on and on and on. It's a very useful report card and a very depressing look at the priorities that have led to the deteriorating state of American infrastructure. Fortunately, we have thinkers and leaders, people like Chuck Marohn, who leads the group Strong Towns, who has pointed out that this is not sustainable. And he uses the concept of the growth Ponzi scheme, that billion or $1 trillion of spending from the federal government has the negative effect of creating liabilities that communities can't afford. So the funding is up front to build the bridge or to build the highways, but 5 or 10 or 20 years later, when it comes time to maintain it, that funding doesn't help. and the communities can't sustain it themselves. We see a similar dynamic in industry where even General Electric, a venerable American company and global company, in 2016 tried to rebrand itself as a 124-year-old software startup. The problem was basic jealousy with the titans of Silicon Valley attracting so much investment, and GE feeling like its steady but relatively small margins weren't doing enough to make it profitable. But their attempt to fail fast itself failed. They tried to instill a kind of fail fast Silicon Valley culture within General Electric, and it just didn't fit. So going all in on innovation didn't work out very well for General Electric. Another type of organization where we've seen this play out time and again is universities. This is on the University of Pennsylvania's campus, or just off it, the Pennovation Center. Innovation speak also leads to a lot of bad puns and kind of silly phrasing, which is another probably less serious problem with it. The more serious issue on college campuses is that when millions of dollars are devoted to innovation centers and things to make that side of their corporate and business clientele happy, there is a corresponding neglect of the core enterprises of a university. And this is part of my daily experience as a dean of a college of arts and sciences. I wish I could get the kind of money for writing and math and physics that, that universities tend to spend on innovation centers and pie in the sky fantasies. In other organizations, we see this play out as well, and this bridges between the organization and individuals. So in software, the best measures that we have is that software companies or large organizations in general spend between 60 and 80% of human time and budget on maintenance. A very small sliver that you see goes to design and the important work also of implementation and testing, but the majority goes to maintenance. So what does this mean for individuals? It means that the people who do maintenance and care work get the short end of the stick. And so this has been very vividly demonstrated during COVID here in the United States, certainly in San Francisco, in New York, in Texas. It's people of color, and it's women of color, and it's immigrants who are frequently discriminated against in American society, who are overwhelmingly and predominantly at risk because they are the ones who maintain the essential functions of society, whether it's healthcare or groceries or education, package delivery, things like that. Okay, so that's the bad news. Let's get to the maintenance mindset and how this maintenance mindset can help overcome the problems that the innovation delusion has created. Now, when we talk about the maintenance mindset, we talk about three basic ideas. The first is that maintenance sustains success. The second is that maintenance depends on culture and management. And the third is that maintenance requires constant care. And I'm going to talk about each of these ideas, and especially in the context of the three scales that we brought up before: the societal, the organizational, and the individual. So first, maintenance sustains success. This is intuitive. The old saying is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of care. In an industry, people who work on maintenance and facilities management will tell you stories like this day after day after day. We've heard dozens of stories like this since working on this book, where something like a $5,000 maintenance contract will prevent a $350,000 replacement costs on things like pumps or chillers, that when they go down, there's a loss of productivity, and emergency costs are much steeper than an ordinary maintenance contract. The places that do this really well, that understand that maintenance sustains success and they need to invest in it, are known as high reliability organizations. And here's a few examples, including a couple of the titans of the digital industries and a couple of the most disruptive companies. Amazon Web Services and Netflix, they compete on uptime. They need to make sure their networks are constantly working, or else the customers complain. You know, if AWS goes down for an hour, if the video on Netflix jitters, they really hear about it. It's a reputation on the line. It's the same at the societal level with the Air Force or really anyone in the aeronautic space. And of course, in medicine, in the medical enterprise, the medical industry, there's a real need for high reliability. And it's not just in surgery, it's not just in the purity of drugs or clean rooms, it's also in the pumps, in the chillers, and the data services that make these massive health organizations run and allow them to achieve such good outcomes. Second is that maintenance depends on culture and management. Now, when Lee and I talked to professionals in maintenance and reliability, and we were excited to learn about all kinds of professional organizations, such as the Society for Maintenance and Reliability Professionals, they come back to a couple things repeatedly. And one of them is this saying that I've put up here: the soft stuff is the hard stuff. And when they say that, they mean that it's pretty easy and it's well known how often to apply grease to certain joints or how often to replace certain parts. The technical aspects of maintenance and reliability are not too difficult. What's difficult is getting the entire organization to buy into the mission and getting everyone from the executive suite to finance to the rank and file in the field to be on the same page. So it's really a matter of management. One company that's met this challenge really well that we talk about in the book is a software company called Fix in Canada. And their founder told us sustainability and maintenance, in our minds, they're the same word. They really think about Fix as a sustainability company. In fact, they sell computerized maintenance management software. They sell the software that helps companies and organizations keep track of things. But when they frame their mission in terms of sustainability and in meeting the challenge of climate change, they found a lot better buy-in from their employees. They found recruiting a lot easier, and they are consistently now named in the lists of top places to work in Canada. So it's connecting to a deeper issue with maintenance. As Lee said, you know, these concepts aren't just standalone values, they connect to something deeper. The third aspect of the maintenance mindset is that maintenance requires constant care. There's a range of ways that organizations and professionals can apply principles of constant care to maintenance. It starts with basic knowledge of assets. Books like this one that I've got here by Ricky Smith and Keith Mobley about rules of thumb for maintenance and reliability engineers have appendices of checklists, very simple things, and points to grease and parts to change on regular intervals. And that is a protocols for constant care that's very important in industrial settings. Now, I mentioned Fix before. In the process of writing the book, we met and learned about other companies that are in the maintenance management industry, and they take different approaches, and some of them are creative and even innovative. It really marries some ideas of innovative software with the application towards maintenance. Augury uses artificial intelligence for predictive maintenance, which is kind of the next wave historically in maintenance work. Upkeep is a mobile-first maintenance company, and 60 Hertz is founded in Alaska, and it's an offline-first maintenance company. So it's not assuming always-on connectivity. So it's these kinds of approaches and these kinds of companies that illustrate that there's maintenance also means renewal. It doesn't just mean keeping everything the same forever. So how do we apply these principles to the three levels that I mentioned of societies and organizations and individuals? Well, in the United States, it's the fix-it-first mentality that's illustrated on this slide that Lee and I feel, in terms of policy, is the wisest path forward. So, you know, trillions and trillions of dollars, like I said before, on building new things will just create liabilities for future generations. So there's a lot of things broken, and there's a lot of valuable work and investment that goes into fixing things first. We're so excited to be here to talk about the Maas Tunnel and Dutch attitudes towards these things, because for Americans, the Dutch tradition in the maintenance mindset is something to look up to. So, you know, it concerns me at the outset that someone said, well, you know, we're not so good at this, we need work. But at the same time, I think that's exactly the attitude that you need to say that even if we are good at it, it still needs work. We can always improve more. In the United States, to move from the level of the society to the level of organizations, during the COVID pandemic, we saw one example of the cost of poor maintenance, which was at the beginning of the pandemic, and there was a severe crunch in supply for ventilators. The United States government had them on hand, but they didn't work because they were in storage. Finally, at the level of individuals, again, during the pandemic, it has been wonderful to see the outpouring of support for essential workers. What our society and what all societies need to do now is to compensate them, to provide paid leave, to support them with sick leave. The health care situation, at least in the United States, needs a lot of work. So it's not just about saying thank you, it's about providing actual material support for them. And of course, a final link with the individuals at the individual scale is the connections between maintenance and repair. And there's a couple of great new books out about repair and repair cafes, and it's part of a culture. And that's really a big message that we want you to take away. So this is the information for the group that Lee and I founded and run now with Jessica Meyerson. We're called The Maintainers. You can connect with us at themaintainers.org. And one reason why we wanted to end here is that it's not really, it would put a quick shelf life on our book if we said, here's the 5 policy actions that you should follow right now. That's a genre of book that's very time specific. We think these problems are more enduring and require deeper conversation and collaboration across professions, across national borders, across generations, in all different kinds of ways. And so we hope you can join us. If you go to the Maintainers website, you can join the mailing list, or you can write to Lee and I. We've got all kinds of initiatives that we could use some energy and support. So we'd be really excited to connect with you there. Here's our contact information. I mentioned the website. That's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.